कहाँ से स्टार्ट करना है? स्कॉलर से स्टार्ट करना है। हाइपर पावर वाला क्वेश्चन हो गया था हमारा, वो जो किम रिचर्ड की थीसिस थी, आई थिंक वो कंप्लीट हो गई थी हमारी, है ना? आगे बढ़ना वहां से, ठीक है जी, चलो। तो अगला स्कॉलर जो है सर, उसका नाम है पीटर कैल्वो कोरेसी। पीटर लिख लो पहले, पीटर कैल्वो कोरेसी, कैल्वो CALVO, कैल्वो कोरेसी, CORESSI, कैल्वो कोरेसी, CORESSI, कैल्वो कोरेसी नाम समझ आ रहा है, पीटर कैल्वो कोरेसी, ठीक है। पीटर कैल्वो कोरेसी की थीसिस क्या है? वो ये कहता है कि भाई यूएस ने जो बॉम्ब बनाया, उसकी वजह से यूएसएसआर को ये लगा कि भाई दे आर एट द मर्सी ऑफ द अमेरिकन. He has given a very important idea. He says that when America created their bomb, nuclear bomb, atomic bomb, the Soviet at that time began to perceive that now they are at the pure mercy of the Americans. And they were very clear, the Soviets, that they don't want to be at the mercy of the Americans. So as a result of which, the Soviets decided to counter the Americans by developing their own bomb. So his idea is very clear. He says that Soviets were not keen to have any kind of security relationship with the Americans. When we say that they were at the mercy of the Americans, means that they are seeking security from the Americans. Okay? So because the Soviets were not interested in having any security partnership with the Americans, they were not interested in being at the mercy of the Americans. Consequently, because of this, the Soviets decided to establish their own weaponry. So he has explained that why the arms race actually began. He has given an explanation that if US created a bomb, it compelled the Soviets to create their bomb. So he has given, this scholar can also be utilized when we are writing about arms race. Because Soviets were not keen to have security partnership, not keen to be at the mercy of the Americans which are there. Okay, this idea is very clear now. Let us move further. There is a question that how did the Soviet work upon the parity thesis? देखो, one thing we have talked about earlier is कि why was the need for Soviets to have parity? Let's first understand that. एक तो यार फिर वीडियो ऑन नहीं है मेजोरिटी लोगों के अभी भी, कर लो भाई, थोड़ा मेरे लिए आसान हो जाता है यार, आपकी शक्लें देख के कि समझ आ रहा है या नहीं आ रहा, ऑप्शनल है, थोड़ा सा कष्ट कर लो. अच्छा, अब देखो, व्हेन वी आर सेइंग कि व्हाट वाज द नीड फॉर द सोवियट्स टू डू पैरिटी, दैट इज द फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन. व्हाई वाज व्हाई वर द सोवियट्स इंटरेस्टेड इन पैरिटी? By one reason why they were interested in parity is because the Americans had disturbed the balance of power by creating the atomic bomb. And because the Americans had disturbed the balance of power by creating the bomb, therefore one thing now became important, that Soviets had to, number one, catch up. The word important here is catch up. ये word important इसलिए बेटा because when we talk about China and when we look at China-America relationship that we will study after some time in subsequent lectures, we will see that the Chinese will also use the same word but in a different context. What is the difference in the context? मैं आपको अभी बता देता हूँ ताकि clear रहे आपको. Soviets are looking at parity with the Americans at the nuclear level. So they wanted to catch up with the Americans at the nuclear level. So they use the word catch up to explain nuclear level patching up. But when China uses the word patch up, and when China says that we want to basically progress further, they are going to do it in the context of capitalism. So there is a difference. The word used by the Soviets is in the nuclear context. The word that will be used later in the 1980s by China will be in the developmental context. ये चीज आपको क्लियर होनी चाहिए, पहली बात तो. दूसरी चीज क्या है सर? हाउ डिड द सोवियत नाउ वर्क अपॉन द पैरिटी थीसिस? अब हमने एक कॉन्टेक्स्ट तो क्रिएट कर लिया कि व्हाई वाज पैरिटी टू बी डन. नाउ हाउ डिड द सोवियट्स अचीव दैट पैरिटी? सोवियट्स ट्राइड टू थिंक इन टू वेज. First way of thinking was that the Soviets decided that we will achieve parity by basically ensuring that we develop our own indigenous nuclear technology. And to develop their indigenous nuclear technology, the Soviets went on to say a very important thing, that the best way to do that is to have a complete hold over the territories which are part of the Soviet Union. Have control over those territories which are part of the Soviet Union, which are going to be suppliers of essential material to help us to achieve that parity. Point समझो ध्यान से. भाई Soviet is a big territory. America is one country. After American Revolution, North South debate, all that was over. So America is one united America. There is a Soviet Union. That Soviet Union is made up of different socialist republics. Soviet Union ka idea is कि the best way to achieve parity is to ensure that those socialist republics which are part of the Soviet Union and which have nuclear material, they must provide that nuclear material to Russia so that Russia is able to use that nuclear material from the socialist republics and thereby then ensure one thing, that they are able to utilize it for the purpose of development of the nuclear weapon. Now, in order to ensure that those socialist republics which are part of the Soviet Union easily provide the nuclear material which will help us to achieve parity, what is the best strategy? The best strategy to ensure is that we have a complete hold over those socialist republics. अब आपको इससे एक पॉइंट ये समझ आएगा कि why Soviet Union was always a dictator led, why they were not willing to promote democracy, and why any inlet of the idea of democracy was perceived as a danger by the Soviet Union. Because Soviet Union, ये क्वेश्चन आगे आने वाला 2 पेज के बाद. Because any attempt of democracy in Soviet territory or Soviet controlled socialist republic would mean a disturbance of parity. And the Soviets understood one thing, that if America wants to disturb our parity, it's not that they will innovate with a weapon more superior. देखो सर, एक चीज आपको पता है बेटा, कि when we talk about nuclear weapons, when you create a nuclear weapon and once a nuclear weapon is created, one thing is very certain, that a nuclear weapon is a nuclear weapon. Only thing that you can do after creating a nuclear weapon is improve the yield of the weapon further. To improve the yield of the weapon, all that you require is the same nuclear fissile material. भाई असला बारूद तो नहीं बदलेगा ना बेटा, ढांचा तो नहीं बदलेगा, सब सेम रहेगा. आपको सिर्फ इंटेंसिटी बम की चेंज करनी है. तो once you create a nuclear weapon, boss, what we are trying to say is that the space for further innovation is finished. That means if America has developed a nuclear weapon, if Russia has developed a nuclear weapon, they are both at parity. And any attempt to change the yield of the weapon will not disturb that parity. The only way to disturb the parity is what? Understand this very carefully, because this point that I am telling you here will have implications on India-Pakistan relations later. The only way to disturb parity now with the Soviet Union is to dismantle the supply chains that provide Soviet Union with all that fissile material through which the Soviet Union can create their weapon. Point समझ आ रहा है मेरा? If India today wants to tackle Pakistan, and if India today wants to ensure that the Pakistani nuclear weapon is not a threat to us, the easiest way to ensure that is not by dismantling or destroying Pakistani nuclear weapon. It is not by creating tactical nuclear warheads. What are tactical? We will see them later. It is not by matching the nuclear arsenal with Pakistan, but ensuring that we cut the supply chain to Pakistan from where Pakistan gets access to all nuclear material. Getting the point, sir? I can disturb the parity of Pakistan that way. This is the problem in the Cold War period between Soviet Union and America. So Soviet Union was very concerned about all those socialist republics which had those supply chains. Because Soviet Union understood one thing, that those supply chains are crucial for our parity. And you know one thing, sir? One of the most crucial countries for the Soviet Union at that time was Kazakhstan. which is at the heart of Central Asia. Kazakhstan is the country which has a tremendous amount of uranium reserve. And Kazakhstan was also a part of the Soviet Union since 1925. So Soviet had to ensure this, that any attempt of any regime change, any attempt of any democracy promotion in this territory is likely to disturb the parity. Therefore, Soviets decided to have complete hold and prevented any form of influence of democracy. Number two, the second strategy that the Soviet Union decided to adopt for achieving parity was that they decided to expand the communist influence in the world. Because they thought that once we create more communist countries in the world and reduce the number of capitalist countries in the world, then one thing is very certain, that in such a scenario, what will eventually happen is that these communist countries, if the number of them in the world is higher than the capitalist countries, then they can all act as supply chains for the purpose of nuclear arsenal. And number two, not only all these communist countries can act as supply chains, but tomorrow we can encourage these communist countries also to become nuclear powers. Case in point, China. Sir, Russian intervention in Chinese civil war. Russian intervention to ensure that China wins the civil war. China winning the civil war in 1949. After China winning the civil war in 1949, birth of Communist Party of China, control in China. And then ensuring that China also tests its nuclear weapon. So that Russia, China collectively as two important communist states continue to have nuclear weapon. Are you getting the idea now? So the strategy adopted by the Soviet Union was very clear. No disruption to the supply chain. And second important point is have more communist states in the world to ensure one thing very clearly, that more number of states become communist, vis-a-vis they becoming nuclear. Getting the idea very clearly, sir. And see the beauty that the focus on ensuring supply chain as part of the military industrial complex remains crucial till today. Until today, countries focus on ensuring that. And that is the reason why all these mini-lateral groupings coming up, be it the quadrilateral security dialogue, be it the I2U2, they all focus on ensuring supply chain endurance. बेटा ऑप्शनल में चीजें लिंक करके लिखनी है, वरना नंबर नहीं मिलेंगे, मैं बता रहा हूँ, वरना 150 नंबर आएंगे टोटल पेपर 1 पेपर 2 मिला के 75 पर पेपर. यहाँ पे चाहिए 1000% कॉन्सेंट्रेशन और 2000% अबिलिटी टू प्रोसेस योर ब्रेन एट अ हाई लेवल. ये जीएस नहीं है बेटा कि कुछ भी बकेयती चल गई. ऑप्शनल है ये बेटा. यहाँ पे अगर दिमाग के घोड़े नहीं दौड़े ना, मैं बता रहा हूँ बहुत बुरे डूबोगे. प्रोसेसिंग कैपेबिलिटी को सर 2x स्पीड पे रखना, जो जो चीजें बताते जा रहा हूँ, बिकॉज ये चीजें एक बार सुन ली, अगर नहीं लिखी तो आप गए. और दूसरी बात ये है सर कि आपको पहले भी बोल चुका हूँ, फोकस मोर ऑन डेवलपिंग द लार्जर नैरेटिव इन योर माइंड. हर चीज की एक ब्रॉडर पिक्चर को सोचो. जब मैं आपको ये बात बोल रहा हूँ सप्लाई चेन वाला इशू, आपके दिमाग में ये पॉइंट्स इंस्टेंटली आने चाहिए कि क्या सप्लाई चेन्स मिलिट्री लेवल पर आज भी क्रूशल है या नहीं है, और अगर हैं तो वो कहाँ दिख रही हैं. भाई क्वाड्रिलेटरल सिक्योरिटी डायलॉग, I2U2, both of these are what, sir? Two instruments which are two minilaterals that want to create enduring supply chains today. So are you getting the point, sir? So one thing is now therefore very clear in this scenario, that Soviet Union had a very well-defined strategy to achieve the parity. And because of this well-defined strategy, now let's understand, sir. This is an important point about the Soviet psyche. That because the Soviets have always tried to counter their adversaries by taking adequate thinking, this is a crucial element of the strategic culture of Russia. Russians have never ever tried to do anything without calculations. This is what differentiates the strategic culture of America with that of strategic culture of Russia, sir. This is what differentiates. If I put it in a very simple language, sir, अमेरिकन्स वो टाइप के लोग हैं जो मार्केट में उतर जाएंगे और फिर सोचेंगे कि चलो मार्केट में दुकानें देख के सोचते हैं कि अब क्या खाना है। रशियंस वो लोग हैं सर जो घर से निकलेंगे ये सोच के कि कौन से रेस्टोरेंट में जाके कौन सी डिश ऑर्डर करनी है और उसके बाद क्या ऑर्डर करना है और स्वीट में क्या खाना है और फिर कब कराना है। ये पूरी प्लानिंग करते हैं सर सोवियत्स। और अब आप इसका दूसरा कॉन्सिक्वेंस देखो भाई। इफ द सोवियत यूनियन हैज अ स्ट्रेटेजिक कल्चर ऑफ डीप प्लानिंग, think about one important point that I am about to say, that if India is going to have in the near future such a deep relationship with the Soviet Union that almost 80% of their military hardware will come from Soviet Union, then don't you think that this strategic culture of Soviet Union will also have an influence over India? This is the point to remember, sir. That is why you see when we talk about security issues, in security issues, I have told you earlier, those people who have done the security issues course earlier, that when we talk about India's strategic culture, we always say, ki, sir, there is a long-term planning focus in India's strategic culture as a crucial element. Why? There is an external influence behind this. While there are other indigenous routes, वो हम देखेंगे इस बार के सिक्योरिटी इश्यूज के कोर्स में कि what are those indigenous routes? वो एक नया एलिमेंट है, वो नई रिसर्च है, but this is an external element. So getting the idea. So Soviet Union created a very well-crafted strategy. And with this well-crafted strategy, one thing became very clear, that the Soviets were able to achieve parity without difficulty. Number one. Now, if we look at the next scholar's name is Jair Kasparov, Geir, Jair, Geir, Kasparov, Kasparov, Kasparov. He says a very important thing, sir. He says that the point that helped the Soviet Union to emerge as an international actor after the World War II is its clear vision on technological superiority, along with a vast territory at their disposal. This is a very important point by this scholar, sir. He says that Soviet became an important player in the international relations after the World War II, became a crucial international actor in the global politics after World War II because of a blend of 2 points. First point is that the Soviets had a very clear-cut vision about their technological superiority, something that we have just talked about in the previous question. And second thing that he says is that they had a very vast territory at their disposal, sir. Sir, this is a very important point because having a vast territory comprising of multiple socialist republics at their disposal means that any country that aspires to emerge as a core player in the international relations in the future must definitely have a geographical territory at its disposal which is influential enough to play an important role in the world affairs. Think about it, sir. America had a very vast territory at their disposal, flanked by Atlantic Ocean at one side and the Pacific Ocean at the other side. So by default, the Americans also are in a position to ensure one thing, that, sir, along with whatever technological vision and other visions they have, a vast territory at their disposal plays an important point here in their overall superpower status. Same is the case of Russia. And now try to link this point to India. That if India today aspires to become a superpower, one point that India has time and again repeated in international relations is that India says that we have a territorial supremacy because of our geo-strategic location in Indian Ocean. I am using a word called geo-strategic location, sir. I am not saying geopolitical, sir. I am using geo-strategic. The word geostrategic in the context of India here means that while geography favors me geographically, the same geography favors me strategically. And when we say strategically, it means that because of our location, no other country can ignore us today. If for the long period of time Americans had tried to ignore India by saying that India is not an influential actor, today they have realized the importance of India when it comes to security of maritime lanes of communication. Therefore, compelling America to rename the erstwhile Asia Pacific now finally to Indo Pacific. नाम तो बदलना पड़ गया ना बेटा तेरे को, पहले नहीं मानता था जब हम कहते थे, अब समझ आई उसको. So, sir, one thing is very clear here, that Kasparov's thesis is crucial in explaining that what may work for a superpower in the future. Apart from vision and other things, sir, your geostrategic location is very crucial, which in the Kasparov's thesis was available with America, which was available with the Soviets, so it worked for both of them. Are you getting the idea or no? क्लियर हुआ है नहीं हुआ ये? चीजों को समझो ध्यान से और अप्लाई करो. फिर मैं वही बोल रहा हूँ सर, मैक्रो व्यू, कीप अ ब्रॉड माइंडसेट, एंटीनास मस्ट बी ओपन सर. जंग लगाया तो उतार लो. So one thing is therefore very clear now, that in this particular situation, if we proceed further and we now come to strategic and ideological bipolarity and Cold War, which is an extension of the topic only, but though separate topic mentioned in our syllabus, the PSIR vocabulary building mein first term that we have is called the Cold War. Cold War. Now, what is meant by Cold War, sir? Sir, Cold War, in a very simple language that we use in general studies, we are not going to use it here anymore. Obviously, we are in the optional part. So Cold War basically is a phenomena, number one, that has a destabilizing global effect. Cold War is a phenomena which, number one, has a destabilizing global effect. And number two, it has the same effect because there is no direct military confrontation, but proxy confrontation. Because, sir, let's try to understand it now. We are saying, beta, that Cold War is basically a scenario of global instability. Acha, after some time, you know what will happen as the topic will progress, we will make one inference after some time that a bipolar world, which is a Cold War world, is also unstable, and a multipolar world is equally unstable. One reason why a multipolar world is unstable is because in a multipolar world, because there are multiple claimants to global power status, competition is intense, stability will be zero. As a problem in a bipolar world is, if you contrast it with multipolarity, is that in a bipolar world, we say because the competition is only between two blocks, ideally stability should be higher. But the problem is that because the competition is between two blocks, the stability is lower. You know why? Because you have written, as there is no direct military confrontation, the confrontation occurs in a bipolar world more through proxy wars. So because there are proxy wars that occur in a bipolar world, and because these bipolar countries and the bipolar blocks try to indulge in proxy wars in each other's blocks, they enlarge the canvas of confrontation. Point समझ आ रहा है मेरा? If multipolar world is an era of problem, if a multipolar world is a world where there are multiple claimants of power, so as a result of which there will be destabilization of the global order, in any scenario, we can never say that a bipolar world will have some stability. Because in a bipolar world, these two bipolar blocks will try to do proxy conflicts in each other's territory and thereby widen the conflict zone, widen the canvas of the conflict. अब आप कहोगे कि sir, then in this scenario, what is the solution? Is the solution that there should be a unipolar world? Sir, unipolar world will be more destabilizing than a bipolar world. More destabilizing than a multipolar world. Why? क्योंकि सर इन अ यूनिपोलर वर्ल्ड, प्लीज ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड बच्चे, इफ देर इज ओनली वन मेजर पावर विच सेज दैट आई एम द सोल सुपर पावर, it has number one become the sole superpower firstly by defeating other superpowers. If there is only one superpower which has tried to become the sole superpower, and if it has defeated other superpowers, then those other superpowers that have got defeated in a unipolar world are insecure and want to take a revenge against that sole unipolar power. And then in the second case, in a unipolar world, you will also have a situation where there will also be a scenario where not only that one unipolar power has defeated other powers and those defeated powers want to take a revenge, but there are going to be alternate powers which also aspire to become superpower. So, sir, a unipolar world will be more destabilizing in this scenario. So, sir, the crux of the matter is very clear, sir, that global stability is a myth. इस पे क्वेश्चन आ सकता है कभी भी बेटा, और ये बाइपोलैरिटी, यूनिपोलैरिटी, मल्टीपोलैरिटी थीसिस यूज कर लेना फिर वहां पे, क्योंकि यही क्वेश्चन आएगा इस तरीके से कि ग्लोबल स्टेबिलिटी इज अ मिथ सिंस द कोल्ड वॉर टिल टुडे। क्योंकि कोल्ड वॉर की चर्चा हो रही है तो ये लार्जर आइडिया क्लियर रखो दिमाग में। आप देखो ना सर कि व्हेन यूएस बिकेम द सोल सुपर पावर और द यूनिपोलर पावर इन द वर्ल्ड आफ्टर डिफीटिंग सोवियत यूनियन इन द सो कॉल्ड कोल्ड वॉर, व्हाट हैपेंड आफ्टर दैट? सोवियत यूनियन got disintegrated. Russian Federation was born from the ashes of the Soviet Union. And today it is the same erstwhile Soviet Union, the Russian Federation today, that wants to basically take a revenge against America for breaking the Soviet Union. और आपको मैं कई बार ये पहले भी बता चुका हूँ, जिसको हम आगे भी पढ़ेंगे, कि दी रशियन स्ट्रेटेजी टुडे टू टेक अ रिवेंज from America for breaking the Soviet Union is that Russia will today break the European Union, which is America's extension of the idea in Europe. Therefore, the conflict in Ukraine. Therefore, Brexit. Sir, Russia will sow seeds of dissension. Russia will sow seeds of hatred. आप देख लो इस चीज को. Look at the behavior today of France vis-a-vis Israel. The confrontation happening between France and Israel today. Because France today knows one thing, that in the future they need the support of the Russians more than they need the support of the Americans today. Why? Because sir, the French people today are pioneers in nuclear energy. Russians are pioneers in natural gas. Both of them have the cleanest source of gas, cleanest fuels. And both know very clearly that the globe will dominate only with these clean fuels tomorrow. Both of them are trying to undercut America. French President Macron's recent attempt to not support Israel is nothing but seen as a global snub by France to America, not to Israel, sir. The message is going to US. सर थोड़ा न्यूज़पेपर वगैरह पढ़ रहे हो, नहीं पढ़ रहे हो हैं? शक्ल देख के तो एकदम ऐसे लग रहा है जैसे पता नहीं मैंने कौन सा, मतलब कोई अरबी भाषा बोल दी है कोई, यहाँ बलोची में बात कर रहा हूँ मैं. फ्रांस इजराइल इशू सर, larger game behind that is the snub to US. And the beauty is that the French and the Americans have never stood together with each other since the beginning of the Cold War. They have always been at antagonism with each other. Even though France is at the global power table, NATO member, etc., whatever. But France is still in no position today to support the American global ambition. Too much of trouble, sir. थोड़ा सा जियो पॉलिटिक्स को ध्यान से ऑब्जर्व करो बेटा. सो अब आते हैं, हाउ डिड द टर्म कोल्ड वॉर इमर्ज इन डिस्कोर्स. बड़ी सरप्राइजिंग की चीज है. It is in 1934 that what happened was that there was a person who was a faith healer. Faith healer को समझते हो आप? बाबा था. बाबे होते ना जैसे, 1934 में एक बाबा था, और बाबा सबको कहता था कि मैं तुम्हें ठीक कर दूंगा, मेरे पास शक्तियां हैं। जैसे गुरमीत राम रहीम सिंह, उसके पास कोई कपल जाएगा, बाबा जी बच्चा नहीं हो रहा, अगले दिन सुबह बूम बच्चा हो गया। गुरमीत राम रहीम के कितने बच्चे हैं, ये तो मतलब काउंट करने बैठ जाए तो शायद मेरे ख्याल 40-45% हरियाणा उसी में निकला है। हिसार तो पक्का निकलेगा, हरियाणा का तो मुझे पता नहीं, लेकिन हिसार डेफिनेट। तो एक फेथ हीलर था 1934 में, लोगों को कहता था मेरे पास शक्तियां हैं, मैं तुम्हें शक्तियों से ठीक कर दूंगा। दिक्कत ये हुई कि 1934 में उसको सांप काट गया। सांप काटने के बाद वो अपनी शक्तियों का प्रयोग अपने ऊपर कर नहीं पाया, और जब उसको सांप काट गया उसको मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट दिया गया, और मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट से वो ठीक हो गया। तो सर ये मेडिसिन में टर्म निकला कॉल्ड कोल्ड वॉर, and this term that came finally in the discipline of medicine was a term where it was signified that there is a cold war between religion and science. फेथ हीलर बाबा, एक यहाँ पर वो बाबा है सफेद दाढ़ी वाला भी, ईसा फाउंडेशन, क्या क्या कुकर्म कर रखे हैं उसने भाई साहब। मैं बता रहा हूँ, मतलब मेरे को कोई मार्केट में मिल जाए ना बंदा कहते हुए कि हम तो बहुत मानते हैं ईसा फाउंडेशन में, मैं कहता हूँ बेटा तू गोबर में भी अगर मान ले तो, और ये कह दे कि गोबर में सोना है, तो मैं तेरे को तो भी मान जाऊंगा क्योंकि तेरा दिमाग भी उतना ही है। तो आप सोचो सर, मतलब देश का ये दुर्भाग्य है कि 1-2% का हमारा चीफ जस्टिस ऑफ इंडिया जो है वो बचाने में लगा हुआ है इस बेवकूफ से बाबे को। सोचो, ये देश का दुर्भाग्य है इस समय। तो कुछ नहीं हो सकता सर यहाँ पे, फॉरेन सर्विस ज्वाइन करो, देश छोड़ो, आईएएस बनोगे तो देख लो क्या होगा आगे। अब वन थिंग इज इम्पोर्टेंट सर, कोल्ड वॉर का ओरिजिन आपको समझ आया सर? द टर्म इमर्ज्ड बिकॉज ऑफ a dissonance that happened between religion and science. And that too, when in 1934, this faith healer who was affected by a snake bite could not use his faith power to cure himself, but had to get cured by using modern medical science. इंडिया में भी कोल्ड वॉर चलती है, आपको पता है। एक वो काना बाबा है, आंख नहीं खुलती उसकी, लड़की बिठा दो सामने तो आंखें पूरी खुल जाती है, वरना आंख नहीं खुलती। उसने हरिद्वार में एक बहुत बड़ा आश्रम बना रखा है, लोग जाते हैं वहां पे, हवा अंदर हवा बाहर। वो जब ट्रीटमेंट उसको कराना होता है वो खुद जाता है यूएस, और लोगों को कहेगा यहाँ पर आ जाओ। सोचो आप, कोल्ड वॉर है सर, आपको अपने उसमें भी फेथ नहीं है। मेरे को एक आयुर्वेदिक डॉक्टर ने बताया था, कहता है कि आयुर्वेदा की मेडिसिन ना बहुत सोच समझ के किसी प्रॉपर आयुर्वेदा प्रैक्टिशनर से लेनी चाहिए, क्योंकि जनरली ये जो आयुर्वेदा के नाम पे मेडिसिन मिलती है ना सर, उसमें मरकरी होता है। इस रीजन से वो क्या करता है, टेम्पररीली आपके उसको क्योर कर देता है, बट लॉन्ग टर्म में आपको खत्म कर देता है। ध्यान रखना आप भी, कुछ सेवन कर रहे हो उसका तो मरकरी अंदर पता नहीं कितनी चली गई है, इससे अच्छा थर्मामीटर तोड़ के ही खा लो। तो सर वन थिंग इज वेरी क्लियर, कोल्ड वॉर इमर्ज्ड लाइक दिस एज अ टर्म. Now if we see the intellectual origins of the cold war in the international relations, and why did the rivalry emerge and persist, so these are three aspects to study now. So intellectual origin of the cold war can be traced back to 1917 Russian revolutions. So when the Russian revolution happened, at that time there was a rise of communism. Communism emerged as a counter to capitalism, and not only it emerged as a counter to capitalism, the more important aspect about communism was that it emerged as a threat to capitalism, thereby sowing the seeds of the cold war ideologically, intellectually in 1917 itself, sir. Because when Russian revolution happened, and after Russian revolution, when Soviet Union finally said that we are not only going to follow communism, But they said that we will even make sure that countries which are capitalist remove capitalism and thereby become communist. It sowed the seeds for what is called as a big intellectual ideological clash. देखो, had the communist countries and had the Soviet Union simply said that we want to follow communism while there might be another system that is there called capitalism, then it would not have created this kind of a scenario. आप समझ रहे हो पॉइंट को? It is the propagation of the communism abroad, and it is the attempt to use communism to counter capitalism, annihilate capitalism, to the annihilation of capitalism, is what frightened the capitalist world. अच्छा, अब दूसरा सवाल यहाँ पर ये उठता है कि सर व्हाई डिड द राइवलरी इमर्ज? सर, राइवलरी इमर्ज्ड इन द इंटरवॉर पीरियड. It emerged in the interwar period because interwar period, now you understand the period between World War One and World War Two. So in the interwar period, the rivalry emerged finally because at that time the capitalist countries tried to counter communism by trying to completely tear the communist fabric. Their strategy was that let's end communism altogether. अब देखो सर, the beauty is communism is saying we want to end capitalism. Capitalism is now in the interwar period saying we will end communism. And these capitalist countries, with the objective of ending communism, adopted the number one strategy, which is called the usage of Germany. We have talked about it earlier also. We have understood that how German problem was manufactured, how Hitler was brought into a situation knowingly, unknowingly, and how Hitler was then appeased. We have used the word called appeasement also. That how appeasement of Hitler then eventually was done with the larger objective of using Hitler for the purpose of countering the Soviet Union. But sir, the problem is, as we have seen earlier, beta, you now will understand that when you create a genie out of a box, you do not know then how to put the genie back into the box. You can only take it out, sir. You cannot put it back. Because the idea of Britain and France was to use Germany to counter Russia. And what they never thought was that a powerful Germany one day, a Germany on whom appeasement is done one day, will not just counter Russia, but will also try to counter the British and the French, which happened eventually. When Germany had declared war on Britain and Britain and France had declared war on Germany. And sir, this valuable lesson has not been learned by anybody. मैंने आपको ये पॉइंट पहले भी बताया था कि Americans were the ones who never learned this lesson. Because during the Cold War, in order to further counter communism, during the Cold War, the Americans now took the use of the Mujahideens in Afghanistan. And now they created what is called as the global phenomenon of terrorism. Sir, imagine, sir. Half century of humanity was wasted because Britain and France conceptualized, created Hitler, leading thereby to World War II. And the next half century was wasted by the Americans, who created terrorism as a tool and Islamic jihad as a tool with the larger objective of countering the communists. और देखो, सबसे बड़ा फ्रॉड ये है कि these capitalists today, number one, claim that we are democracy at heart and we are the tolerant people at heart. And these capitalists who say that we support democracy and tolerance are the ones who could not even tolerate another ideology that was counter to capitalism. आपको इसीलिए मैं कई बार ये बात बोलता हूँ कि सर, कैपिटलिज्म विल वन डे कोलैप्स ऑन इट्स ओन वेट. बिकॉज सर, कैपिटलिज्म इज द biggest dictatorship philosophy in the world. Biggest. In fact, it is the more intolerant version of any ideology, even than communism, which is there. It is more totalitarian than even communism, which is there. Because capitalism just cannot tolerate any divergence or deviance from their thought. The world suffered because of Hitler. The world suffered because of the terrorists. The world continues to suffer till today because of these terrorists. अब आप समझते हो सर कि मैं दिल से अमेरिका को गाली क्यों देता हूँ? दिल से आता है सर, अंदर से, वो आवाज अंदर की है, मेरे इनर वॉइस, कॉन्शियंस है वो। कोई व्यक्ति अगर अमेरिका का साथ दे रहा है ना सर, मैं आपको बोल रहा हूँ वो व्यक्ति टेररिस्ट से कम नहीं है। या कोई व्यक्ति अगर ऐसी बात करे तो अमेरिका को लेके, सर इट्स अ टेररिस्ट स्टेट सर। एंड टुडे दे हैव द ऑडेसिटी टू ब्रांड मेनी अदर कंट्रीज इन द वर्ल्ड एज टेररिस्ट। अरे सबसे बड़े टेररिस्ट तो तुम हो। कहीं पर कोई आपको अमेरिकन मिल जाए, आज से कसम खा लो, उसको ये पूछ लेना आप अमेरिकन हो, हाउ आर यू टेररिस्ट, ऐसे इंट्रोड्यूस करो उनको। शेम देम सर, इंटरनेशनली शेम देम, देयर इज नो अदर वे। Humanity is dying because of these people. So, sir, intellectual origin, what began during 1917 Russian Revolution, the rivalry persisted because of the distinction that was created at that time in the interwar period through the use of German. During Cold War, the rivalry further persisted because of the usage of the Islamic Jihad as a tool. And capitalism has tried to ensure only one thing, that till the time they do not decimate the idea of communism, they will not rest. But sir, what they are not realizing today is that it is these communists today who have joined hands. There is a reversal theory at work. और पता है रिवर्सल थ्योरी क्या है आपको? जस्ट फॉर योर सेक ऑफ नॉलेज, नॉट फ्रॉम द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ एग्जाम सर, बट today it is the same communists who have joined hand with the Islamic jihadis and today have become what we call as an antidote to the capitalists today. आप देखो सर कि पूरे वर्ल्ड में जितने भी कैपिटलिज्म के इनिशिएटिव्स के खिलाफ प्रोटेस्ट हो रहे हैं, उसमें लेफ्टिस्ट कम्युनिस्ट प्लस इस्लामिक जिहादियों का एक अलायंस है। अब जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल अभी आपने देखा वो गाजा स्ट्रिप में सेव राफा, सेव राफा कितना हाइप हो गया था। हॉलीवुड के सेलिब्रिटीज जो आ रहे हैं, बड़े बड़े लोग जो है, नोबेल प्राइज विनर्स जो है, वो आ रहे हैं। सर ये इकोसिस्टम है लेफ्टिस्ट प्लस इस्लामिक जिहादियों का। अब उन्होंने एक अपर हैंड ले ली है और आप देखो हर कैपिटलिस्ट इंडेवर को वो काउंटर करेंगे, हर कैपिटलिस्ट इंडेवर। मैं आपसे यही सवाल पूछ रहा हूँ ना सर, ये सेव राफा वाले लोग तब कहाँ थे जब कश्मीर में हमारे लोग मर रहे थे? नोबडी सेड सेव कश्मीरीज। कश्मीरी क्या हमारे लोग नहीं है? आर दे नॉट आर पीपल? फिर व्हाई दिस हिपोक्रेसी सर? व्हाई ओनली एट अ सर्टेन टाइम विल यू गेट एक्टिवेटेड? सो टुडे इट्स अ रिवर्सल, बट एनीवे that is a separate point. One thing is very clear sir, this is how it originated, the rivalry emerged, and this is how it persisted. And one thing is important beta, please remember that this rivalry has not ended. The clash between communism and capitalism still goes on. What has happened is that hardcore communists have reduced in number, and communists have understood that the best way to survive under the capitalist umbrella is to not say that we are communists, but say we are centrists. New vocabulary sir, that we are centrists. And those who say we are centrists are nothing but sir, by heart they are communists and will always have affinity for communists, will have all agendas which are communist, will support everything which is communist, and by default will support everything which is Islamic. ये भी देखो आप. So it's a new vocabulary today, centrist, because they know sir that they cannot withstand today the onslaught of capitalism. So therefore invented a new vocabulary. ठीक है जी। सर स्कॉलर है जॉर्ज ऑरवेल, नेक्स्ट पेज पे बेटा। जॉर्ज ऑरवेल नाम है स्कॉलर का, भाई का नाम जॉर्ज ऑरवेल है। थीसिस है यू एंड एटॉमिक बॉम्ब। यू, वाई ओ यू, यू एंड एटॉमिक बॉम्ब। A very, very crucial point he says, sir, in the elaboration of his thesis. He says कि sir, nuclear weapon is not a weapon of war. Nuclear weapon is the weapon of defense of ideology. कितनी बड़ी बात है। Nuclear weapon is not the weapon of war, sir. Nuclear weapon is the weapon of defense of ideology. और देखो, communists and capitalists both developed the nuclear weapon as a defense of ideology. Both wanted to ensure defense of their ideologies. See the second thing, sir. Today, there is the same point which is applicable when we look at the situation in Iran. Sir, why do you think that Iran today is desperate to have a nuclear weapon? Some people say that they are desperate to have a nuclear weapon because they face a threat from Israel. That is not the correct assessment. The reason why today Iran wants to have a nuclear weapon is because Iran is a Shia country that knows that Shias don't have a weapon. It's a defense of their religious Shia ideology. And they know that the Sunnis today have a nuclear weapon. And Pakistan has got the financing of the Sunni weapon through the fountainhead of Sunni Islam called Saudi Arabia. And that is why you see, sir, in every literature, in every book, Pakistan always is quoted saying that we have the Sunni bomb. Sunni bomb क्या होता है? हमारा इंडिया में अपना बम है तो हम क्या ये कहते हैं हमारा शर्मा मर बम, गुप्ता बम है। वी हैव गुप्ता बम, निकाल गुप्ता बम। मोदी ऐसे बोलेगा, सोचो। लिया लिया लिया, गुप्ता को ऊपर कर, ऊपर कर, गुप्ता ऊपर कर, टेढ़ा कर गुप्ता। ऐसे होगा कभी? सोचो कितनी वाहियात किस्म की बातें हैं। चलो पाकिस्तान जैसा नीच देश, उससे आप उम्मीद भी क्या करते हैं? सुन्नी बॉम्ब। तो ईरान कहता है कि वी विल हैव अ शिया बॉम्ब। सर डेस्परेशन ऑफ ईरान। अच्छा, प्रॉब्लम इन द सुन्नी वर्ल्ड इज ऑल्सो, यू नो व्हाट, सुन्नी वर्ल्ड इज नॉट हैप्पी विद वन सुन्नी हैविंग अ बॉम्ब, सर। अदर सुन्नीज ऑल्सो वांट टू हैव अ बॉम्ब। सद्दाम हुसैन वांटेड अ बॉम्ब, गद्दाफी वांटेड अ बॉम्ब, मोहम्मद बिन सलमान टुडे वांट्स अ बॉम्ब, सऊदी अरेबिया। वो कहता मुझे भी बॉम्ब चाहिए। यूनाइटेड अरब एमिरेट्स, अल नायन फैमिली, वो कहती है हमें भी बॉम्ब चाहिए। काला चश्मा लगा के घूमता है अल नायन। सऊदी अरेबिया के उसको देखो ना, यूनाइटेड अरब एमिरेट्स के शेख को देखा है आपने? फोटो आती रहती है उसकी, यूट्यूब पे घूमता रहता है इधर उधर। बड़ा भाई साहब कातिल आदमी है वो, बिल्कुल जेन्युइन आदमी नहीं है। मैं बता रहा हूँ आपको, शक्ल पे मत जाना उसकी, बहुत कारनामे हैं उसके। तो सर वन थिंग इज वेरी क्लियर, इट्स ऑलवेज अ डिफेंस ऑफ आइडियोलॉजी। A weapon is never a weapon utilized. For that matter, in fact, when we will do the India's nuclear wala topic, na, you will see one point, sir. There is a scholar in India by the name of भरत कर्नाड। मैं आपको उसकी थीसिस भी कराऊंगा भरत कर्नाड की। भरत कर्नाड ने पता है क्या बोला? इंडियाज बॉम्ब इज हिंदू बॉम्ब। उसने भी ये वर्ड यूज किया, डिफेंस ऑफ आइडियोलॉजी, इंडियाज बॉम्ब इज हिंदू बॉम्ब। पर भरत कर्नाड के पास ये एडवांटेज था कि मतलब थोड़ा इंटेलेक्चुअल था। उसने एक हिंदू बॉम्ब बोल दिया। उस समय शुक्र करो कि राहुल गांधी छोटा था, नहीं तो वो कहता था पिछड़ी जातियों का बम। हम कास्ट सेंसस कराएंगे और देखेंगे कि कौन से कास्ट को बम के कौन से हिस्से में रखना है हमें। और शुक्र है बाल नरेंद्र मोदी भी उस समय जो है स्टेशन पे चाय बेचता था, वरना ये हो जाता ब्राह्मण बम। शुक्र करो उस समय, लिटरली कह रहा हूं मैं, थोड़े इंटेलेक्चुअल थे। बट सर डिफेंस ऑफ आइडियोलॉजी, डोंट फॉरगेट दिस। एट द हार्ट ऑफ द क्राइसिस ऑफ ईरान इज द सेम प्रॉब्लम। इट्स नॉट द थ्रेट ऑफ इजराइल, it's not the threat of Israel. That's only a cover used. It's only a shield used. What George Orwell has explained way back as the confrontation between Soviet and US rivalry at the nuclear level is defense of ideology. Be clear about this. There is a vocabulary term, sir. The term is called reparations. 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 So what is the meaning of the word reparation, sir? Reparation means that it's a fine. Jurmana. Fine. Which is imposed on an aggressor country for the loss of life and property, sir. Loss of life and property on an aggressor. अब यहाँ पे अगला क्वेश्चन अगर आप देखो सर, व्हाट वाज द जर्मन क्राइसिस एंड हाउ डिड इट लीड टू द राइज ऑफ आइडियोलॉजिकल बाइपोलैरिटी, sir? When the World War II ended, at the end of the World War II, Germany was told that you have to pay reparations because Germany at that time was perceived during the World War II as an aggressor. So Germany was told that you have to pay a fine as an aggressor for the loss of life and property that you have caused to other countries. But you know the problem is what, sir? Problem is that Germans were deliberately told that you have to pay reparations to Soviet Union. You have to pay it to Soviet Union. Because if you remember, we have talked about it earlier that Germany and Soviet had a treaty of friendship, a pact of mutual non-aggression that we talked about. And despite having that pact of mutual non-aggression, there was aggression. In fact, we had said that the pact of mutual non-aggression was in reality a pact of aggression. So they said, you have caused a tremendous loss of damage to Soviet in the form of life and property. So give it to them in the form of money. So give money to Soviet. Soviet was very happy. पैसा मिलेगा भी, 15-15 लाख आएंगे सबके अकाउंट में. पर जर्मनी ने कहा कि नहीं भाई साहब, जुमला है. Germany refused to pay reparations. And after the end of the World War II, when Germany refused to pay reparations, and when Germany ended up in saying that we will not pay these reparations to Soviet anymore, and USA also did not compel Germany. USA deliberately tried not to compel Germany. That is the time when the Soviet understood one thing, ki sir, this idea of reparation was just used as a tool to harass us. And the Americans are not serious about having an equitable world. देखो सर, इनसिक्योरिटी कैसे पैदा होती है. Had the Americans at that time pressurized these Germans to pay reparations, had the Americans at that time tried to ensure that Germans pay reparations, things would have been way different, sir. But that did not happen. And as it did not happen, one thing now became very clear, sir. Soviets started believing that America is not serious about having an equitable world. Soviets understood the second thing, that America is not serious about ensuring a rules-based order in the world. Rules-based order. Word important है बेटा, rules-based order. क्यों? क्यों important है? क्योंकि sir, there was a compulsion upon Germany to pay reparation. And rule says that if Germany is compelled to pay reparation, it ought to pay. Refusal of Germany, reluctance of US to pressurize Germany means violation of the rules-based order. So one thing became very clear, sir, that Germany at that time and the refusal of Germany at that time sowed the seeds of the Cold War again. अब देखो अगला क्वेश्चन सर, यूजिंग द स्कॉलरली एनालिसिस आर्ग्यूमेंट ऑफ द वार्म वाटर पोर्ट डॉक्ट्रिन एग्जामिन द टर्किश क्राइसिस एंड हाउ डिड इट लीड टू द राइज ऑफ द आइडियोलॉजिकल बाइपोलैरिटी. Sir, here we will use the thesis of a scholar whose name is Jonathan Knight. Jonathan Jonnathan, Jonathan Knight, Knight. Jonathan Knight, Knight. What does Jonathan Knight say, sir? He says कि sir, Turkey was a neutral country after the World War II and even during the World War II. But Turkey was compelled to take a change of their neutrality. His thesis is this: Turkey during World War II and immediately after the World War II was neutral, but they were compelled to go for a change. Ab, what were the compulsions? Compulsions, he says, is that Turkey had access to Turkish straits of water in the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea. टर्की के आसपास अगर आप मैप देखो सर की, तो वहां पर टर्किश स्ट्रेट्स हैं. They basically are connecting points between Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And because they are connecting points between Mediterranean and the Black Sea, one thing became now very clear, that Turkey geostrategically was very crucial as a country. To use that word now, which you will understand. After the World War II, what happened is that Jonathan Knight says that Russia tried to pressurize Turkey to give access to the Turkish straits to Turkey and Russia. So World War II खत्म होती है. Russia immediately tells Turkey कि we want the access to these Turkish straits because these are warm water ports. And because they are permanently warm water ports, these ports and these waters will allow us to do trade with the remaining part of the world. Acha sir, at that time, after the World War II, because UN Convention on Law of Seas was not there, as UN clause came in 1982. So there was no clarity at the global level or at the country level, at the bilateral level also, on how to manage and share the waters. अब Turkey at that time thought that Soviet Union is pressurizing us forcibly to give them access to the Turkish straits. They are forcing us. Soviet Union carefully told Turkey again कि चुपचाप दे दे access, मैं तेरे को बता रही हूँ Turkey. Turkey refused. Turkey had a border with a country called Georgia. Soviet Union immediately brought their army at the border of Georgia and Turkey. They brought their armed forces. Turkey started getting panicked. And when Turkey panicked, they asked for help. At that time, the American president, Harry Truman, he decided to send troops to Turkey. He decided to ensure that Turkey will get access to American troops to prevent this arm twisting done by the Soviets. Now, when the American troops came, they were stationed in Turkey. And when they were stationed in Turkey, one thing became very clear, that America at that time said that these troops have gone to Turkey to help Turkey to fight communist aggression. Harry Truman used the word communist aggression for the first time in the case of crisis of Turkey. And this term after that, communist aggression, will now become a part of the American dictionary for the next 50 years. Communist aggression. अगला क्वेश्चन देखो सर. यूजिंग स्कॉलरली एनालिसिस एग्जामिन द रोल ऑफ द ग्रीक क्राइसिस एंड हाउ डिड इट लीड टू द राइज ऑफ आइडियोलॉजिकल बाइपोलैरिटी. Sir, here the scholar that we have is Dean Acheson. Dean, D-E-A-N, Acheson, A-C-H-E-S-O-N. Dean Acheson, A-C-H-E-S-O-N. Dean Acheson says that Greece was basically occupied by Germany. But after the World War II got over, Germany in 1944 left Greece. So Germans had occupied Greece. In 1944, they left Greece. Now, when they left Greece, after that, what happened is that in Greece, a civil war began between two groups. One was the monarchy, which people wanted to be restored, and the other was the communists in Greece. So between the communists and the monarchy, a civil war broke out. When the civil war broke out, the Greek monarchy immediately sought help from Britain. Britain supported the monarchy. When Britain supported the monarchy, one thing now became further clear. Soviet Union supported the communists. So Greece now therefore became another third country where we were now witnessing an ideological clash between monarchy being supported by capitalists and the Communist Party being supported by the Soviet Union. So Greece became now another theater of this particular thing, another clash. And when Britain supported the monarchy, Britain also allowed US to support the monarchy. US also saw an opportunity in Greece to counter the Soviet Union. So Turkey and Greece emerged as two friction points in Europe, where America began to intervene in the affairs of Greece and Turkey to counter the aggressive communist regimes, aggressive communism. And now, if you see the next question, that how was the Truman doctrine born? In the backdrop of Greek and Turkish crisis, examine the doctrine through the scholarly prism. The scholar here is Michael Karl. Michael Karl, Karl. Michael Karl says that the Greek and the Turkish crisis played a very influential role because it influenced the thinking capability of Harry Truman. And Harry Truman now understood one very important thing, that in order to counter the aggressive communism, we have to help democracies. And in order to help democracies from subjugation of the Soviet Union, we have to provide them with economic, financial aid. We have to provide them with military support when required. So Greek and Turkish crises were influential in molding the behavior of Harry Truman, who understood that the only way by which communists can be tackled is by ensuring that those countries which are democracies must be given financial and military support if communist aggression comes as a threat to them. What the idea, sir? So it is in this backdrop that these two events convinced Harry Truman to create what we call as the Truman Doctrine. ठीक है जी, क्लियर जी यहां तक? गुड टू गो. कल कंटिन्यू करते हैं, फिर यहाँ से आगे बढ़ते हैं, मिलते हैं. थैंक यू.